So we're going to start here on Yud Aleph of the base towards the end of the Ovid with Ika Di'am. Aliba de Rabbanon Loti Boilach. In other words, the Gemara now assumes as a Dora Posh that in the case of Machzir Grushaso, then the Tzara is Misyabems. Why? Came in the Isakar Iaker. And that means that the word Tumah does not appear, even though it does appear, in the parasha of Machzir Grushaso. We lift it up and we put it down in the parasha of Sota. And therefore, according to the Rabbanan, surely the Tzara Sota of a Machzir Grushaso Misyabems. Kiti Boilacha, or rather the original suffix of Rav Yehuda when he presented this question to Rav Sheshes was Aliba de Rav Yossi ben Kippur, who interprets the word Tumah in the parasha of Machzir Grushaso as referring to Machzir Grushaso. What's the din? And we're now going to analyze the status of Tsaras Machzir Grushaso, according to Rav Yossi. Afal Gav the over Rav Yossi Tumah Machzir Grushaso the Ksiva, but nevertheless, Mi'ek Rachmana he Toeva v'lo Tsarasa Toeva. What we don't know is how to interpret the word he. Do we derive from the word he as a mute to exclude Tsaras Sota? Tsaras Machzir Grushaso. And therefore, even though the Torah classifies Machzir Grushaso as an erva, the word Tumah, nevertheless, it's not an erva to pater up to Tzara. It's only an erva vis-a-vis Sarah herself, but not vis-a-vis Rivka. Or Odilma, no, we had another option with regard to the drasha derivation from he. The mid of he is telling me he toeva, v'ein boneh toeva. That even though Machzir Grushaso is a prohibition and a violation of a law, but it doesn't generate any sort of psul of, we spoke about the psul of Chalola. A Tzarasa toeva. But according to this interpretation, the assumption is that once the Torah classifies Machzir Grushaso as an erva, then she will call her Sarah patters up Rivka the Tzara bidin Tsaras erva. And now the Gemara is going to try to come to some definite conclusion about this question. Amar le, so Rav Sheshes responds to Rav Yehuda, Tanisua. We actually have this in a Mishnah later on Daf Mem Daled, and we're talking about a case of a person who's married to two wives and he dies without children. And the halacha is that one of the various brothers, let's say there's only one brother, just to make life easier, if he decides for Yibum or for Chalitza, either way, he patters up the Tzara. Hoisa achas, shera v'achas psula. What happens if amongst these two wives, let's say of the late Reuven that fell for Shimon for Yibum, one is a kshera, one is a psula. Im haya choletz, if the live surviving brother decides to opt for chalitza, then chalitza the psula. He has the option of giving chalitza to the psula. But if on the other hand he opts for yibum, then he's got to be miyavim the kshera. So the Gemara now tries to analyze this mission. My kshera, my psula. Ile ma kshera, kshera alma. If we're talking about Shera, which means that she is what we call a miucheses, she has yuchsim, and therefore she'd be allowed to marry a Kohen. And what is psula? Psula is li'al. Then the word psula, just like the word Shera li'al, the word psula is li'al. And what does that mean? Let's say she's a grusha from a previous marriage, and she's not allowed to marry a Kohen. If that be the case, then there's something choppy, so to speak, about this Mishnah. And we're not going to be able to survive, interpreting the Mishnah. Why? Because the Yavam himself is not a Kohen, as far as we know. Or he might not be a Kohen, and it doesn't say that the Yavam was a Kohen. So came into the Dechazya. There's even a psula. Let's say she's the marriage. She's a grusha. That's not relevant to him. He's not a Kohen. So psula is ru'ila. Is my nafkale mina. So what difference does it make who he's miyabim and who he's cholet? Because as far as he's concerned, a grusha is considered ksherov. So there's no kshera and psula. Elalav, we have no choice. Our only fallback position is that kshera is kshera le, upsula psula le. It means that we're going to go back to Reuven, who is married to these two women, and we're going to ask the following question: was he permitted to marry each one of these two women? And the answer is no. Sheryl Le, he was allowed to marry one of these two women. Psula Le, he was not allowed to marry the other one, but he married her anyway. Well, mind you, what would be a case where Psula Le and he wasn't allowed to marry her? Is Machzir Grushasa. It's a case of remarrying his Grusha, and she's Asur Labaila. She's not allowed to marry him, he's not allowed to marry her. So Kshera in our Mishnah then is Tzarasa, right? We say that there are two wives of Reuven. One of them was Psula. Why? Because she was Machzir Grushasa. The other one, we'll call her Rivka, she's the Tzara. So the Kshera is the Tzara that Reuben was permitted to marry. So now, Uktani, Vimhoya miyavim l'Kshera. I mean, that makes sense, right? He should be miyabim Kshera. So we see that the Machzir Grushasa does not pater a patsora. Just 1 second. We were vacillating back and forth as to whether or not Machzir Grushasa would remove Yibum from the Tzara as well. And this was only a suffix according to Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbanan, we said, Pasha, there's no question that there is Yibum as far as the Tzara is concerned, because the Torah never called Machzir Grushasa an Erev, right, because of the Yaakov. But according to Rabbi Yossi, that the Torah classifies Machzir Grushasa as an Erva because Tuma Ksiva Bey. Then we were vacillating whether or not that goes as far as to pater up the Tzara, depending on how you darshan he. Here you see clearly in the Brisa that Im Hayim Kshera, and who are we referring to? We're referring to the Tzara. Shera means the Tzara. She was not Machzir Grushasa. So you see that when two women fall for Yibum, one is a Machzir Grushasa, the other is a Tzara, she doesn't pater up the Tzara. And that means that we're not going to learn the pasuk of he, referring to what was it called? Bonea Toevin, or Tzarasa Toevin. No. We're going to say that that Tzarasa is not Toevin. And he toeva v'ain tzarasa toeva. Now, even before you read the next line of the Gemara, we're already experienced enough to know that when the Gemara brings such a kind of a proof from a brisa based on a very complicated calculation of what the brisa is referring to, the Gemara is going to definitely reject this proof. Low. The Olam, let's go back to our original understanding of Kshera and Psula. Kshera li Alma, which means that a Kohen is allowed to marry. And Psula li Alma means a Kohen is not allowed to marry. You asked me the Kamrid, but our Yavam is not a Kohen. Kevan Delidei, Chazia, Mainafkele Mina. And who cares whether she's a grusha, she's not a grusha, she's a chalutza? Those categories are irrelevant to the Yavam because he's not a Kohen. The Gemara answers, "My nafkemina mishum de Rav Yosef." Now, we're about to learn Rav Yosef, and he gives you one-line introduction. He says that if you have a choice between the Kshera and the Psula, and you're going to do Chalitza, then we're going to compel you, again, whether you like it or not, to choose the Psula. Why? She's already a Grusha at this point. No way, no how a Kohen could marry. If you add to that a Chalutza, you haven't changed her status at all. On the other hand, if you choose the other way around, and you decide to give Chalitza to the Kshera, then you've taken a woman who could marry a Kohen. She's right now an Almana, her husband died, but she can marry a Kohen. And now you passel the Kahuna. Whereas if you do the Chalitza to the Psula, she's already a Grusha, she's already Psula Kohen, and the Chalitza doesn't impact. So by giving Chalitza to the Psula, you have spared the Ksara from being Nifseles to Kuhun. Yom Rav Yosef, Han Shona Rebbe, here's where Rebbe taught us, Lo Yishpoch Adam Mei Bar B'Acherim Tzrichim Lana. In other words, don't throw out water when somebody else can use the water. Maybe you don't have any need for the water, but somebody else might need it. He writes here, Shebitshachu Motzias Nshei Achiv Milafanav Al Yidei Chalutzi Yesh Lo Limana Milifsol Osan Acherim B'Midas Ha'efshna V'Alkein Ein Lo Lachlotz L'Kshera U'Leposel L'Kuna Kol Zman Shehu Yachol Lachlotz L'Psula She Ben Kach Asura L'Kuna V'Alkein L'Yidei Kein Tiftar B'Meila Afak Shera. So you have it within you to give Chalitza to the Psula, and now the Kshera would also become Muteres L'Shuk, right? She doesn't need her own Chalitza. And if she didn't have her own Chalitza, she could marry a Kohen. Then the Mishnah said what? The Im Bali Yabem. Yabem l'kshera. What does that mean? Means he's not allowed to give chalitza if he chooses chalitza to the kshera, but if he wants to be miyabem, he can be miyabem l'kshera. No, actually, right. We're talking about a non-Kohen, right? So he can marry either one of these. He can be miyabem either one of these tsaros, whether it's the psula or the ksheira, and there's no difference, no preference whatsoever. So again, let's just go over the logic one more time. If he decides to opt for chalitza, then he's got to give chalitza to whom? The psula, right? Psula meaning a grusha in this case. Because now Hatzara can marry a Kohen immediately. The very moment that the chalitza is implemented to the psula, the ksheira can marry a Kohen. Because the chalitza removes the yibum for the entire bias from Ruvain's zika. And she's not a chalutza. It's interesting because we once had a spara, I think it was Rav Yochanan, that the chalitza is done like as a shlichus for all the brothers. But I don't think it goes, does it go the other way around according to Rav Yochanan? I think he went the other way around too, to drop the lav of Eishasat down to the level of a lav. Remember? Then it would seem that the chalitza relates to all the nishei ames, all the sorrows. But I still think that Rabbi Yochanan would not go as far as to say that she's psula l'kuhun if she didn't get chalitza. She may be a conceptual chalitza, but not an actual chalitza in the physical sense.
With Averson and Nisuin, same way, or who Averson your?
Well, she's going to need to get, or what? Her
right. I mean, I'm saying.
Right. If after the Averson he decides to divorce her, she's psula l'kuhun. Yeah. Yeah. If on the other hand he dies, then even if she was in a sewer, she can marry a Kohen. Doesn't give her a head to murder her. So it comes out now that the Gemara has rejected the proof from this brisa, because initially we thought this brisa was telling us that im hayim miyavim l'kshera, which means the tzara is the kshera, and the psula was machzir gushasa, and that would prove that according to Rav Yossi, and only according to Rav Yossi, even according to Rav Yossi, right? That would have proven, right? That would have proven that even according to Rav Yossi, although the Torah considers machzir gushasa and erva, she does not part of the tzara because he v'lo tzaras. And the Gemara now rejects it. Why? Because we're not talking about Shera and Psula in terms of a Machzir Gushasas, but rather the status of a woman as a Grusha. And you have two ladies that fell for Yima. One is a Grusha, and the other, and the Tzara is not a Grusha. And the entire subject of this Mishnah revolves around the statement of Rav Yosef, Rebbe, or applying Rebbe, that he should certainly give chalitza to the grusha who's already psula mikuna, rather than give chalitza to the kshera, because in doing so he's taken a woman who's kshera lakuna and he passes a lakuna. So since from his perspective he doesn't lose anything. You follow my point? He has, once he's doing chalitza, what difference does it make to him which of the two he gives chalitza to? And now Rav Yosef is giving him a mandate. No, choose this one for chalitza. She's already psula. Okay, so now we're still back at the suffix of Rabbi Yehuda. I'm assuming that this next sugi is also built on the Ika di Amri. Let's see if I'm right. Toshma. Amachzir gushasa mishen nises. Ivitzarasa choletzes. Now it's interesting because we had a machlokes about Machzir Gushoso, whether it was even Mina Erisin or only Mina Sud. It seems that this price that we're learning now is of the opinion that Machzir Gushoso is an Isser Lav that applies after she had Nisud. It's not sufficient that she had Erisin. But what's most important for us is that after being Machzir Gushoso, he died. She fell for Yibum together with Hatzara. That Sarah is the Grusha, and Rivka is the Tzara. And it says that he Vitzarasa Choletzes. Okay. According to Rabbi Yossi, wait a minute, what does this prove? It says he Vitzarasa Choletzes, correct? Now, again, if we say that according to Rabbi Yossi, Machzir Gushoso is considered an erva because Tuma Ksiva Bekarayim. So why are we requiring Chalitza? Rasa Chalitza. But if we're going to say that as far as the Chalitza, it's he Toev Velo Sarasa, therefore, let's say why. Just thinking out loud here, why is there no Yibum in this case? So this was the Kal Vachomer that we spoke about yesterday. That if he can't marry her, meaning Reuven, the late Reuven, then certainly his brother Shimon cannot marry. That's what we see. First, the Gemara asks the following: You can't interpret this literally because no bias requires more than one chalitza. Okay, fine. What are we proving? That in the case of a tzara of a Machzir Gushoso, there's no option of yibum, but she requires chalitza. Let's go back to the drawing. According to the Ikad Diabri that we learned now, the suffix was about Rabbi Yossi. And if we say that what the Hito Eva means that the Tzara is an Eva, then the word she should require chalitza. And I'm just trying to work out, both say, let's try to work on this together, which I'm trying to figure out what would be the din of the tzara of a Machzir Gushoso with Rabbi Yossi that we're vacillating about. What are the two studies? So we're going to say that either tzarasa toiva or ein tzarasa toiva. If we're going to say that tzarasa toiva, then the choshi shouldn't even require. Say ein tzarasa toiva, then she should require yibum. Here we have a middle of the road, some sort of compromise that she needs chalitza, but doesn't have the option of yibum. Right? It says he b'tzarasa choletz. Which side is it? So let's go slowly. The fact that there's no yibum, right? It says choletzes. That would seem to indicate that there is a status of erev. Why do you need chalitza? So again, this is the point that we don't know the answer to. It's like right now, it's got to be an axiom that we have to accept. Meaning that even if I assume that the Torah considers Masechet Yevamot an erev, nevertheless the tzara requires chalitza. We really don't know why, but that's like an axiom that we have to operate. There was a time to say that the tzara of a Masechet Yevamot would even fall for Yibum. And the Gemara is rejecting that side here based on the Bryce, because the Bryce says that he b'tzarasa choletzes, implying that there's no possibility of yibum. So basically, we have two questions. One question is, assuming that Masechet Yevamot is an erva, let's say according to Rabbi Yossi, because in the parasha Masechet Yevamot it says, Achrei asher hu tamah, and Tumah here means arayas. So now we're left with two questions. Number one, why does the Grusha herself, Sarah herself, require chalitza? And two, why is there no yibum for the tzara? And we always have to operate with the assumption that even if we have this Tumah Ksiva Bekaraya, she still needs chalitza. We're not sure why. I suspect that the answer to that question might be in the Yalkut Biur. But before we do that, let's see if we can just finish up the Gemara. The Gemara rejects this proof from the Bryce. So the Lav Terutzi Kamakaretzle, we know that this Bryce cannot be understood because it says he b'tzarasa choletz. You can't take it literally. You don't need a double chalitza or for one yavam, one zikah. So therefore, tritz hachi. If you're already tampering with the lashon of the Bryce, and you're going to say that it should be rewritten, and it means he otzarasa, then tritz hachi he choletzes, vitzarasa o choletzes o misyabemes. So we thought to prove from this Bryce that although we knock off yibum vis-a-vis the grusha herself, we called her so, but nevertheless and we also knock off yibum with regard to the tzara, because we're considering her like an Erev. But now we're saying, no, it's a mishabeshta. This price is not reliable, and we have to rewrite the text of the price. So it should say, Icholetzes, Pitzarasa Ocholetzes Omis Yavemis. And that's based on the drush of he, right? He toeva v'yein tzarasa toeva. Now, this whole business doesn't seem to jive with what we said yesterday in the name of Tosfos. Because Tosfos assumed yesterday that according to Rabbi Yossi, Sarah herself, the Grusha, is Ptura af mina chalitza. I mean, she's mamish ke'erva. You can talk about the spin-off. That's already second degree, that's Sarah. But as far as she herself is concerned, she's an erva. She doesn't fall for evil. Now, if that be the case, then this Gemara that we're learning now could not be reflective of the Shita Rav Yossi, because Rav Yossi cannot say that she herself requires chalitza. She's an error. It would have to go according to the Rabbanon of Rav Yossi, because they took the Tumas Arayas from the parasha of Masechet Yevamot and removed it, putting it in the parasha of Nus and Sota. So again, the very fact that this price requires chalitza for Sarah herself, that means that we're not operating with Rabbi Yossi. We can't be operating with Rabbi Yossi. Now, many Rishonim disagree with Tosfos. I think we pointed this out at the end of yesterday. And they hold that even Rabbi Yossi requires chalitza. Because even if we're going to say in Masechet Yevamot Tumas Arayas, that's only in terms of generating an Isa Yibum on the Tzara. But as far as she herself is concerned, she herself, Shita, needs chalitza. So then this Gemara that we just learned could actually reflect the Shita Rabbi Yossi. That's according to the Ramban, not according to Tosfos. According to Tosfos, she herself is an Erev of the Grusha, and therefore she doesn't even require chalitza. Rav Chia bar Ava, Rav Yochanan boy, Amachse Gushaso Mishenises. Now, let's take the Chachamim sheet. There's no Tuma Karayas in Machse Gushaso because all the Ikar. So Rasa Mal. says here, Kigon Ruven v'Shimon Achir, Nasa Shimon es Sarah ves Rivka, the Gire Shimon es Sarah, etc., etc. And then he was Machzik Rushaso, who made Shimon B'libonim, and Naflu Nashad L'fnei Ruven Liyibo. So wait a second, how is this different than what we've been discussing before? This is a case of a tzara of Machzik Rushaso. Omalei Rabbi Ami, B'tiboiloth he gufa. Why are you asking about the tzara? What about she herself, the grusha? So I thought this was the Kal V'chomer business that of Tosas. But let's leave out the Kal V'chomer for now. Let's assume, like the Rabbanon, that it doesn't say Tuma in the parsha of Machzik Rishasa Mishanisas. So then the grusha herself should fall for Yibum, am I right? If we're holding now that there's no Tuma in Machzik Rishasa, then shouldn't she fall for Yibum? Because the Isser Machzik Rishasa is only on Ruvain, it's not on Shimon. So Shimon should be able to be miyabing this woman. Oh, so now, Baruch Hashem, we were Machabit. So now it's the Kal V'chomer. This Kal V'chomer that we had yesterday, we were racking our brains because the Masifta quotes the Tosas. It's all based on this Gemara that we're about to learn now. And this is Rabbi Yochanan responding to Rabbi Ahmed. He gufa lo kami boili. She herself is asura mishum diamrin Kal V'chomer. In the mutala, notice when he married her, that's Reuven, the late husband, right? When he married her, she was muteres. Asura. But now, after the divorce, and she got married to someone else, she became Asura. The Asur law lo kolshkein. The Asur law lo kolshkein. How much more so Shimon the Yavam after the death of Reuven? Etc. In other words, as far as Sarah is concerned, clearly there's no option of Yibum. He doesn't tell you why she needs Chalitza yet, but there's no option of Yibum. Because the Yavam cannot be better than the brother, the deceased brother, whose situation is death, generated Yibum. And if he was Asur law because of Machzik Rishasa, then how much more so the Yavam should be Asur? What's a lumdus here? In other words, the purpose of Yibum is to fulfill the Zikr. That is a reflection of the Ishus that came from the deceased brother. But the deceased brother himself was responsible. Yeah, but that's not the Kalvachomer here. Kalvachomer is that Sarah originally was Muteris. Now she became a Suralo. How much more so vis-a-vis Shimon? Yeah, I'm not understanding this properly because Shimon has a mitzvah yibum, which removes the Isser of Eishasah. So what Isser are we talking about? I mean, as far as Shimon, she's not a Machzik B'Shaso, but you're going back to the Ishus of Ruvain, the late brother. In other words, if somebody would say to me that if the original marriage relation has an Isser at the time of the death of the brother, then there's no Zikas Hebrew. Why? Because Zikas Hebrew means that the Torah is commanding him to continue the marriage relation. But in this case, the Torah was not happy with the marriage relation itself of Reuben when he was alive. So why would the Shimon? So that I can understand, but that's not the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan does a whole trade based on the fact that Sarah was originally Muteres LeReuven, and then through the Gershon, etc., she became Asura LeReuven. How much more so if she's Asura LeShimon? I don't get it, but she is obligated to the mitzvah of Yibum, L'Hakim Zer Li'achim. And there's no Easter as far as all the nations are, but that goof of the Torah gave you the mitzvah. Just see if by chance he said. Well, let's just see. Ella, Hikami Boili, Bitsarasa. What does that mean? As far as Sarah is concerned, there's no Yibum. It's Kalachom. Maybe the Tzara should fall the Yibum. Mi olim Kalvachomer lemitchi Tzara. Oh, look. How does the Kalvachomer operate with regard to the Tzara? Oh, it's the same thing. No, it's not the same. In the case of Sarah, so she's Asura, but Rivka was never Asura. So what? How does the Kalvachomer get off the ground? Be olim Kalvachomer lemidchet Sarah. What kind of logic is that? Again, what does it mean lemidchet Sarah? Can anybody help me with that? Why would we be dochel Sarah? She's not a grusha. There was never an isur. Unless the Gemara is operating with some sort of principle that if there's no yibum to the one of the women, then there's no yibum to any of the other women. I don't see the logic behind that. Olim kalvachomer lemidchi tzara. a little less. And I don't get it. Up to what? Do you have any footnotes here, maybe? The Gemara is saying the following, and I don't follow the logic here, that once we reject the possibility of Yibum for the Yavam to be Miyabe the Grusha of his late brother, then we should reject the possibility of Yibum to be Miyabim the Tsara of the Grusha. And it seems to be based on this Kal V'chomer. Mi olam Kal V'chomer l'midchei Tsara. How does the Kal V'chomer work for the Tsara? I mean, the whole base of the Kal V'chomer is the Isa to the Grusha. But in the case of the Tsara, there is no Isa. So how do you build a Kal V'chomer that would extend to the Tsara? I don't get it. There's nothing there in the notes. I mean, just on the words, Mi olim Kal V'chomer l'midchei Tsara. Just those words. I mean, does he add anything? Masechet seems to be letting me down. Unless I'm not finding it. Maybe it's in the back. Oh, 1 second.
No, I mean, the way that we're left right here
Yeah.
is, we don't know what Homer is.
Right, Old Dilma low, right? But I'm before the Old Dilma low. Oh, low, right? I'm on the first side in the Gemara, right? Rabbi Yochanan is vacillating. So let's go with
But
the
did he
first
say
side.
that he was excluding the Torah?
Yeah, in one side, again, he's not sure about it, but he's offering the possibility that shall we say, Olim Kal V'chomer l'midchei Tsara. But what logic? What's the harm to say such? I just figured it out. Mostly something. Did you ever hear the phrase in Yiddish, an einfallen? You know, something just popped into my brain. Since Sarah doesn't fall from evil, and that's based on the color, but she's the Grusha. Then the status of Sarah vis-a-vis Shimon the Yavam is that of an Eishesach. His Mamela, Rivka becomes a Sarah of an Arab. That's what I think you were. Does that make sense? I mean, it's the only thing I can come up.
Let's quote the.
Oh yeah, what does he say?
Homer does clearly teach that the prohibition of the Yavam, rather, Yibum is inherently in this case. Homer states that since marriage was forbidden, the act of Yibum, which is designed to extend the marriage, must certainly be forbidden.
Right, so that's very good. I think we said that on our own, but now we're adding another point as far as the Tsar is concerned. And he doesn't fear us, the next step. The next step is that since there's no possibility of Yibum, because as you say, I mean, the Zik itself was objectionable. The Torah didn't want that issues to begin with, so now that issues is going to generate Yibum. But now we have to go one step further and say, well, if there's no Yibum, then she becomes an Eishesach vis-a-vis the Yavam, she meaning Sarah. So since Sarah as a Grusha is now an Eishesach, this is no mix of evil, his Meila Rivka becomes a Sarah of an Arab. That's just that one sentence that the articles.
It goes on.
Oh, maybe he has.
And their rations.
You want to read that out loud?
Importantly, they're remarried, divorced, forbidden to a husband apparently unfit for Yibum. In this respect, she is analogous to Mary, who
Ah,
is completely excluded from Yibum by scriptural decree. Rabbi Yochanan requires whether he may compare the married divorce to Arava in the regard that she qualifies
oh,
herself
sorry.
from.
So the only thing he's missing, if I would write a letter to the editor, would be Eishasa. But that's what he means. But he doesn't spell out Eishasa. So, and that he quotes the name of Beis Shmuel. Interesting. Beis Shmuel lived hundreds of years, and he starts with the Holchanan, contemporary. Now the Odilma Lo, I don't know if he has a footnote on that, because now that we finally understood that side, now it's a little bit. Now we've shifted the balance of this of the seesaw. So I would say the following: the other side is to say that although the Torah objects to Yibum of the Grusha, but that's only at the level of a lot. And the Kal Vachomer is sufficient to use that logic to exclude Yibum, but it doesn't mean that there's no Yibum at all. In fact, she needs Chalitza, am I right? Which we never understood why she needed Chalitza. But our problem about Chalitza was a different problem. We were worried, according to Rabbi Yossi, that Achrei Asher Hutamon upgrades her to the status of an Ereva. Why does she need Chalitza? But now we're not going with Rabbi Yossi now. Let's go with the Chachamim. So it's whole the Ikar. But yet there won't be Yibum because of this logic of the Kal Vachomer of Rabbi Yochanan, which operates even according to the Rabbanan, but that only excludes Yibum and it doesn't exclude Chalitza. So what we're saying is that on the one hand, there is a mitzvah of Yibum, there is a Zik, but on the other hand, the Torah objects to implementing through a Maisa Yibum that mitzvah of Yibum because of the Kal Vachomer with the Zika and the issues that came from the deceased brother and so forth and so on. But she still needs Chalitza. If she still needs Chalitza, then it could be that the Tzara falls for Yibum. Because now we're not operating with the erva of Eishes Ach, we're operating with a classic erva of Chayve Lavin, which is what Grusha is. And Chayve Lavin doesn't patter up it, even from you. Is there any footnote on this, on those words, lo? Or maybe it's...
That's all part of it. And then it ends up with thus Rabbi Yochanan inquires, is the co-wife of the remarried divorcee somewhat like the co-wife of the married qualified for Yibum, or is she not analogous to the fit for Yibum?
Does he add that this is only going to Rabbanan and not going to Yossi? No, he should add that. Okay, anyway. But the point is that we're not talking about an Erev of Eishasach. I don't know. You understand what, like, now that we understand it, we can read that footnote. But if we didn't understand it on our own, I think we'd be left wanting as far as the text is concerned. He doesn't emphasize the role of Eishasach here. That's a key of keys here in all of Masechet Yevamot, but certainly here in this sugya. Are we plugging in the Erev of Eishasach? And on the one hand, we're saying, well, the Torah doesn't want Yibum, and therefore it should become Eishasach. On the other hand, we're saying, well, the Torah the Torah objects to Yibum before, meaning implementing Yibum because of this Kal Vachomer business, but that's only at a level of Grusha, of a lot. But it doesn't mean that the entire Zika is excluded, and we're going to prove that from the fact that the Grusha herself needs Chalitza. If that be the case, then she doesn't pater but Sarah according to the second side. And the first side is no. Once the Torah objects to Yibum, we put her back into the category of Eishasach. She's a full-fledged erva, and the Tzara is out of the parsha of Yibum and Chalitza. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Hoch Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Boy Rav Yochanan Amachsi Grushasa V'Shenises Mahu. So far, it's word for word what we had. We don't have the word Sarasa in this new presentation. You follow? He drops the word Sarasa. So we're asking about Sarah herself. Now, what are we asking about Sarah? It sounds like we're asking about Yibum, and we're rejecting this whole Kal V'chomer. Amalei Rav Ami. So now, Amalei Rav Ami V'ti Boilach Sarasa, which sounds to me like he's only objecting to, why didn't you go all the way? You only covered half of the question. Really, there's a second half of the question, the flip side. What's the status of Tsaras? Meaning, even if you come to the conclusion that she herself, the Grusha, does not fall for Yibum, I'm still going to ask you another question. Well, what about Hatzara? Because it could be that she doesn't fall for Yibum because of the Svara of the Kal V'chomer, but Hatzara would fall for Yibum. So Rabbi Ami was a little bit nervous about the fact that the way Rabbi Yochanan's suffix was presented, it only went halfway. He didn't theorize to the second half. So on this, Rabbi Yochanan responds, Al Tzarasa lo kami boy. She definitely falls for Yibum. In other words, according to this second Lishna of Rav Nachman, what happens is that even if I accept the Kal V'chomer, that doesn't have any impact on the Tzara, which is the second side in the first Lishna of Rav Chia bar Abba. Al Tzarasa lo kami boy to lo olim Kal V'chomer l'midchei Tzara. He kami boy, he gufa man. Mi olim Kal V'chomer b'makom mitzvah. Olo. Meaning this whole structure, that the sophisticated svara and lumdus that we've been operating with, namely that the Torah doesn't want to continue the ishus through Zika and through Yibum when the original ishus itself was possible, was also the Torah objected to that ishus. That logic is now being placed into question, is being taken as, what's the word, is being contested or possibly contested. Amalei Tinisua. Apparently, the Gemara is now going to bring a brisa to support that formulation of the suffix of Rabbi Yochanan. So achas kshera v'achas psula im haya choletz l'psula v'im haya miyabim l'kshera. So we've already encountered this brisa. My kshera u'may psula ilay m'kshera. Sherali Alma, that she's allowed to marry Kohen Psula, is Psuli Alma, she's a Grusha or a Chalutza. Evan Dilidite Chazia, Mein Afkale Mina. I mean, he's not a Kohen. So this whole distinction between a Psula and a Kshera doesn't apply. Elalav, by process of elimination, Kshera Le, and it says that so we see that the tzara is muteres. Now, 1 second. If we see that the tzara is muteres, I'm just wondering which lishna this goes back to. If this goes back to the first Mishnah, then the entire suffix of Rabbi Yochanan was about the tzara. Correct? Whether the tzara is misyabemes, and the answer is no, she's not misyabemes. No. Just 1 second. Forget about the tzara. We're not dealing with the tzara, are we? Are we dealing with the tzara here? Just a second. Oh yeah, there's the kshera and the psula. So if there's Yibum, he's Miyavim the Kshera. Oh, the Kshera is not a Grusha. But as far as the Grusha is concerned, she herself should not be included under the Yibum. So we're going then, I think, according to the second Mishnah, that Rabbi Yochanan vacillated about the status of the Grusha herself, and now we prove conclusively that there's no Yibum for the Grusha because he has to be Miyavim the Kshera. But if we would go with the first Lishna, that the entire suffix was about what? Was about the Tzara, because as far as the Grusha herself, we have the Kal V'chomer. So then it might be, right? So Miyavim Kshera. And the Chalutza needs what? I'm sorry, the Tzara needs Chalutza. Yeah, but that was never a suffix. I think the Gemara is trying to prove that there's no Yibum to the Grusha herself, and that establishes the Kal V'chomer, which is the second Lishna of Rav Nachman in the suffix of Rav Yochanan. Or it says, "Lo, we can reject this by Ksheri Lialma, Slupsa Lialma, Udu Kamer Ken Lidei Chazi Meinach B'Limina Mishum Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef Kan Shana Rebbe Lo Yishpach Adam Meiboro V'Acherim Tzrichim Lahem." So this leads us to Toshma. Amaxir Grushaso Mishin Nis. Is that? That's about 12 lines down from the top. Hey, I think we made some major progress. This is challenging. I can't even begin to imagine how you could learn this, for a Daf Yomi here. That's why they say Ani, Ayin Nun Yud is Rashi Tevis, Erevin, Nida, and Yevamos. Somebody told me that the most difficult of those three is Nida. But that doesn't sit well with me because Erevin was tough, and I see how tough Yevamos is going to be. But what can we do?